last time we left things off with Arsenal on the brink, 8 minutes into the 2014 FA Cup final, 2-0 down to Hull City. We're 9 years without a trophy. The pressure had become unbearable. Jose Mourinho had just labelled Arsène Wenger a specialist in failure. Another final defeat would have felt catastrophic, but in the end, it became a bit of a turning point. Aaron Ramsey's extra time winner didn't just win Arsenal the FA Cup, it lifted a weight that had hung over the club for almost a decade. Suddenly, Arsenal could dream again. The financial shackles of the Emirates years were beginning to loosen. Mesut Özil had arrived. Alexis Sánchez were next. Arsenal weren't just winning trophies. They were spending like a big club again. Everything pointed towards Arsenal challenging for the Premier League once more. But football doesn't always follow the script. Because just as Arsenal looked ready to climb back to the top, something far more important was beginning to fall apart. This wasn't just the final chapter of Arsène Wenger's reign. It was the beginning of the end. This is the history of modern Arsenal, and this is the story of the fall of Wenger. Winning changes football clubs. The 2014 FA Cup wasn't just another trophy. Arsenal weren't shopping in the bargain aisle anymore. They'd already broken their transfer record to sign Mesut Özil. We doubled down, signing Alexis Sánchez. Suddenly we look serious again. For the first time in years, Arsenal fans weren't just hoping to compete, they expected to. Expectations have returned, and with expectations came more pressure. Fies, what do you think the impact of ending that trophy drought was? I remember just relief as much as anything. I think relief more than celebration, wasn't it, at the time?
Yeah, even the game was like that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It
was awful.
We went 1-0 down. I thought, oh, we'll have this. Not worried. 2-0 down. I thought, oh no. And honestly, I think personally, Wenger would have gone if we'd have lost that final. It felt like that every time we had a big kind of game, a final. I just felt like if he was teetering, and I wasn't sure where he was going to go with it, and because the problems were glaring, weren't they? They were just glaring, and I just didn't see what the plan was. But that aside, winning that game though, which is what happened, and in the style we won it, just it made me. I did think of this game when we won the league this year. I did think about it. I just think it was. We just crawled. We've done it in the worst way possible, the hardest way, the most stressful way, blood pressure through the roof. But we just got it over the line. And I think, much like we've discussed, the current squad having being the end of an era for them, I would have been really happy and appropriate, and also felt it was appropriate if Wenger had just said, "I'm done, lads. Thank you very much. Take that as a present, and I'm going." But as we know, that didn't really work out. But as a game, it was just Arsenal. It was Arsenal history to do it that way after such a big, all the doubts crept in, the demons came back, the monkey on our back said, "Hello, you're all right." And then we pulled it out of the bag, and it wasn't a great performance, but it was just, there was enough quality in the team just to pull that off. Make that any other team apart from Hull, and we would have been fuming. It was just happened to be that Hull got to the final, so it was just written for us to do that. And Aaron Ramsey was having the season of his career at the time, so it was fitting that he pulled that off. So a great day in the end, lads. I was in Wembley, not in the stadium. I used to work near Wembley, and I got into one of the pubs. I forget what it's now. The Torch, and that was amazing, absolutely amazing. But short-lived, unfortunately, as we look back now.
I still remember that day because I'd got something of a reputation as a big Aaron Ramsey fan. Still am to this day. Will always love him. But I remember coming out like after the game and just having messages from people like basically congratulating me like I'd won because he had scored the winner. I was such a big Ramsey fan that I'd messages literally just congratulating me basically. It was I was like, oh, thanks lads. I'll really put the time in here.
Yeah.
Nate, obviously we had Özil at that time. Sánchez coming in just after. when we spoke about it a little bit on the Tuesday podcast this week, but signing Özil, what do you think that did for the club? It was a real change, wasn't it, from where we had been, constantly losing players that we spoke about last time out in this podcast.
Yeah. Just before I talk about Özil, I've got a funny story about that FA Cup final. My missus, God love her, is not a football fan at all. So obviously the FA Cup final's on, I'm at home, I'm locked in. And it was a bit of a late kick-off from memory, and she was making tea in the kitchen, and Rambo stepped up and scored what turned out to be the winner. And obviously I've completely lost my shit in the living room. I was going mental, and she actually came in holding her hand because she'd pretty much nearly chopped her thumb off in the kitchen because I'd gone mental. So I got a very big shouting out for that. Rightly so, to be fair, but
of course, yeah.
Talking about memories of that final, that was my memory of that final. But yeah, going back to Özil, it was massive, wasn't it? We spoke in the last episode of this series that it was a real rough time for us. The signings that we were making weren't headline grabbing. We were shopping in a certain market. And that's not disrespect to the players that we signed at the time, but
no, but it's fair, I think.
Yeah, it's fair, isn't it? And then I think the thing with the Özil one, I think we touched on it on Tuesday, was just it came out of nowhere. It was one of them. It was late in the evening. I used to have this thing where I'd watch transfer deadline day all day. I'd be absolutely invested. And it just
Harry Redknapp hanging out.
Yeah. All the bingo cards, the yellow tie. Jim White coming out for the last sort of knock-ins and all that kind of stuff. All the fans around the reporters.
Everton fella putting a dildo in that guy's ear.
Yeah, absolute top banter everywhere, weren't it? Was it Zola who brought out like a full-on China tea set for the cameraman and the presenter with tea and biscuits and all that kind? So yeah. And just the amount of people that were at the Emirates when that news broke, it was like everyone legged it to the stadium. We were like, oh my God, what we're actually doing. We're actually signing someone like this, Again, we mentioned it on Tuesday. Signing a player from Real Madrid is an uncommon thing. A lot of people suggest that Real Madrid is the pinnacle. Where do you go after Real? Where do you possibly go after Real Madrid? Regardless of whether they're winning everything or they're going through like a barren spell, you're still at Real Madrid. There's an aura, isn't there? So the fact that at this moment in Arsenal history where we weren't brilliant, that we could attract someone of Ozil's reputation and stature in the game at that time, it was phenomenal. It was so exciting. There was a buzz. There hadn't been a buzz at the Emirates, I'd argue, at all up to that point. And then all of a sudden you sign a player like Ozil and everyone's excited. I remember being gobsmacked. Even my missus, who I've just said is not a football fan, even she knew the gravitas of what was happening. She was like, "Oh my God," And this is someone who doesn't even like football, doesn't really understand, what goes on half the time. And I think that says more than any reaction I can think of. The fact that someone who doesn't even like football was looking at TV just as gobsmacked as I was. It was amazing. It was genuinely amazing, and I think it was a turning point at the time. I think looking back now, was it a false turning point? Maybe, but I think at the time it was definitely a big turning point for us. The hope, the buzz, it was back.
And do you agree with that, Faisal? I think it did change the expectation at the time. Obviously, we know how it played out. We won 3 of the next 4 FA Cups, or 3 and 4 seasons. Sorry,
yeah.
But no league titles. But at that time, did it feel like, okay, maybe we're getting back to, this is what we moved to the Emirates for, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, history tells us that recent history tells us that it was a bit of a false storm, but definitely, I'd never known a buzz like that around the stadium for a signing. It probably is as much of an indicator that we were so shit like it was such a big deal, and the fans were so desperate for anything. But like we won a few cups, and that was really important because we were drifting big time, and we just didn't know how badly we were drifting. We still dreamed of challenging and stuff like that, and now looking back on it now, I'm not sure these players signed for Arsenal Football Club, but they signed for Arsène Wenger, and I think that was sort of like the last knockings of like sort of Arsene's reputation in terms. Because Arsene's reputation was intact. He was doing everyone from outside would understand that he was doing a stellar job, just doing what he was doing at Arsenal, and remaining sort of somewhat competitive. But signing Özil just felt like we were back. We were going to do something big, but then looking back at it now, you think to yourself, well, when have we ever signed a player and then thought that player was going to be a catalyst for something big? And I can't remember that ever transpiring the way we think it was, which is basically we've got him now. That's it. We're set. Because we had about sort of, I think we had like over the previous 4 or 5 years before that, we had about 6 to 8 number 10s playing in our team. That was never the problem. The problem was always at the back, wasn't it? It was either shitty goalkeeper and shitty centre backs, which were costing us. It was never the attacking side because we were quite good. But it was just the name, it was the profile, it was all of that, and and then we signed Özil, then quickly signed Sánchez, who, for all intensive purposes, if Alexis Sánchez was 25 years old now, he'd be the best player in the world. Oh. So. Oh. Do you know what I mean?
We spoke about left wing a lot on that last podcast. Alexis Sánchez at that time, if we could like time travel, would be the absolute dream signing now, wouldn't he?
He'd be the best player in the world right now.
I agree with you. I think he would be.
He'd be the number one player in the world if he was, mid-20s right now. But it was just, the Barcelona and Real Madrid had so much talent that they'd stockpiled that you could sign anyone from them and it would just be like, a world beater. But it was, I get the feeling now, and it's just kind of come to me that maybe this was sort of like Arsène Wenger's last hurrah, that he was trying to just get us back. But being sort of league champions now, you look back at it and you think, we were probably good for an FA Cup. That was about it. And then qualify for the Champions League. We didn't really go out on a limb like, for example, we did last season and go and spend 200 million quid and just done the whole, made everything solid and then built on that. We never really did that. We kind of indulged with our signings, a maverick left winger, a maverick number 10, and then we kind of sellotaped over other bits in the squad to accommodate them. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, all the other teams at the time, they would have loved to have had Alexis Sánchez or Özil, and they probably would have done a lot more with them. But it was fun, mate, and I'm not going to take away from it just because of how we know how it ends now. I didn't want to take away. We were playing some glorious football. Alexis Sánchez turned up in the Premier League and was the best player on the Premier League literally after the first weekend. And he was like that until the moment he decided to go and play for Manchester United. He was sensational. Just a one-man team, mate. He was just carving teams open by himself. He just turned up and just thought, I'm better than everyone here. Bollocks. I'm gonna show everyone that I'm better than everyone. And he was. There were long shots, there were cup final winners, there was goals away at the Etihad, there was goals away at wherever you played him, whatever he did, he was scoring 2 or 3 passes. He was making keepers sit down and chipping them. There was Panenkas. It was the Sánchez show, wasn't it, for like a couple of years, and he was sensational, mate. And he had that little bit extra which Özil didn't have, which was he was a bit tough as well.
Yeah.
Like if it got tough in a game, he'd get tougher. And that's probably the South American in him. Whereas Özil wasn't one of my favorite players at the time. And when he signed for us, I was over the moon. But Özil, make no mistake, was a luxury, absolute luxury. And we didn't have the infrastructure around him to have that luxury. You know, we were playing him with like, I remember there was one game where I think he set up Giroud like fucking like 8 times, and he set up Walcott like 4, and he would have broken the assist record in that game alone had he have just, you know, if people have put their chances away. But sometimes you felt for him, and then afterwards you just thought to yourself, like, Özil was unfortunately one of those players that he knew that the best time of his career was done at Real Madrid, and he wanted to play a decent level, decent club, somewhere where they looked after him, and London made sense for him. Whereas Sánchez turned up thinking, I've just been dumped by Barcelona, I'm going to smash this. And, you know, he did. For all intensive purposes, he did, mate. And if we'd have gone and signed a decent centre-back, decent goalie, we could have had a chance then. Decent midfielder, we could have had a chance then. But we didn't.
I was going to say, the lineup for the Villa final the following year, we won 4-0 in that. But I mean, we had Szczesny, who, I mean, to me, I don't think he was
he had a good career.
An issue as a goalkeeper. Hector Bellerin, Koscielny, Monreal, Coquelin, unless, you know, we don't need to speak about him, but Aaron Ramsey, Cazorla, Özil, Walcott, Sánchez. I mean, that's the making of a really good team, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Do we think this team underachieved? Do you think that is just what the level was? Because obviously it's remembered as a bit of a, you know, Wenger left behind a, you know, not so great squad. But to me, there's a making of a really good team in there.
Yeah, I think you know, look, you make a good point, and you know, I don't want to answer with a cliche, but you know, games are really won on paper, right? And these were really good players on their day. Walcott was a good player. That day was like periodical. Szczesny, for all intents and purposes, was a good shot stopper, but you know, spaghetti hands, like, you know, you just. And we had like these were good players, mate. Monreal, these were good players. You know, Koscielny. Again, you know, I always have a problem with centre backs who are very good at making last minute challenges. Like, I've just got this thing like, why are you always making last minute challenges? Clearly, there's something missing in your game. How many last minute challenges you see Saliba make? Just doesn't make any, does he? He doesn't need to. He's that good. And I just think these were good players for their time, mate. But the Premier League had moved on. The Premier League were all like massive beasts who were powerful and running twice as much as we used to run. And if you remember, mate, that same team that we're saying is a half decent team on paper would get absolutely slapped. It would get slapped. We would have a couple of decent games where we'd turn up, we might go the Etihad and win, and then we'd go through like 3 draws in like the next 4 games because we just didn't have it in us, mate. There wasn't that kind of stamina. We were probably a good cup team. Actually, we were a good cup team. So if you went on an 8-game run, we could try it. If we had to go on a 38-game league, no chance. Which is probably how it worked out.
Yeah, okay. Yes, it's hard because when I look at some of them players, there's definitely some of them that have a good shout to make our current squad, and we're champions right now. You know, right? Even make our first 11. So it's, that's why I think wonder if they underachieved a little. But
I think only Sánchez gets in.
I agree. Sánchez is the only one that even comes close to getting in it.
Aaron Ramsey's playing next to Declan Rice in this current team.
Mother of God.
You like, honestly, I really don't understand how you could think Aaron Ramsey doesn't get in ahead of Zubimendi or MLS or who it might be. There's just no chance that Ramsey is not in. Next to Rice, he'd be perfect.
Maybe ahead of Rice, but yeah, I think Aaron Ramsey's a shout, but
I'm sorry, Ramsey ahead of Rice.
I'm not saying ahead of Rice. I'm saying next to Rice.
Right.
No, I said ahead of Rice, but
I
was
right,
thinking
sorry.
more like positionally ahead of him, not
sorry, right, okay,
not instead of him.
Oh right, yeah. Sorry, I see what you mean. Sorry, I thought you were putting him in over Rice. Okay, yeah.
No chance. No.
Yeah, Rice at like 6, and Ramsey at 8 for me would be.
But the only player. I mean, the only player that other teams came in for during that period was Alexis Sánchez. Nobody came in for anybody else. We rate these players as we may. No one wanted, and I like Hector Bellerin. I like him. I just like the player. Liked how he was. He was genuinely world class for about a week. No, I'm being harsh. He was world class for about a month or two, and he hurt something, and that was the end of it.
Yeah.
Monreal was decent. He was at Malaga before he came to us. I love Santi Cazorla just because I love Santi Cazorla. But Santi Cazorla was that sort of second tier of Spanish midfielders. That wasn't the elite tier of Spanish midfielders. So Coquelin was shit. Koscielny, I think, had a really good highlight reel and was a good defender, but I think was traumatized by playing next to Mertesacker and Rob Holding and the like.
I think if you put Gabriel in that team, Koscielny would perform better than him. You know, like around.
Yeah, 100%. We all agree that centre backs are about partnerships, right? We all agree about that. Mm-hmm. Özil, again, a luxury player. The only player that the top clubs came in for when they heard that our players were all available. We were a selling club, mate. The only player they came in for was Sánchez. They didn't really want anyone else. As much as we love Cazorla, we love Ramsey, no one came in for them. So yeah, I think that there's proof in that, right? And I love Aaron Ramsey. Genuinely had one of the best seasons I've seen by a single Arsenal midfielder in a long time. Either leading up to the Hull final, leading up to the Villa final, he was just shooting from everywhere and scoring, and I loved it. But nobody came in for them. And if they did, with a decent number, they would have gone.
Yeah. We just said we turned around, haven't we? We're a buying club now. We've got Özil and Sánchez. Can't get anyone out of Arsenal anymore.
Not even if we want to.
Yeah. I think this period was probably still, despite 3 FA Cup wins, it probably was a bit of a disappointing period, wasn't it, still? But nothing sums that up more than the year Leicester won the Premier League. Every football fan remembers Leicester City winning the league, but Arsenal fans remember something different. For me, it's the one that got away. Chelsea collapsed. Man City never got going. Man United were rebuilding. Liverpool weren't ready yet. Tottenham even had a chance to win the league that year, didn't they? But yeah, everything was there for Arsenal. We had a squad that definitely had a lot of talent in it. Momentum from a couple of FA Cups. Somehow Leicester still became champions.
Oh,
it wasn't just a missed opportunity. It became the moment many supporters started asking a question they never thought they'd ask. Had football moved on from Arsène Wenger? Nath, do you think at this point?
Yeah, please go to Nathan.
Passed him by?
Look, I think with the Leicester winning season, I still don't think Leicester get credit for what they did. That's just to go on such a run is super special. It's super special, and they had a lot of players come together. All just peaked at the same time, but you look at Mahrez, Kante, Vardy, they were just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And from an Arsenal point of view, I don't think he did get away from us, but I just think that Leicester were that good. I might be giving them way too much credit here. I really might be, but don't get me wrong. A lot of teams around them, like you said, Dave, there was a lot of problems in a lot of teams, and it gave Leicester a bit of a free run at it. But yeah, I mean, we were relying on people like Danny Welbeck to come up with a clutch moment against Leicester. So to say that we were ready for the Premier League, I don't think we were. I don't think we were in a great place. Let's have it right. If those clubs were anywhere near where they normally were, we'd still be finishing 4th, 5th, 6th. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, yeah. It was a typical Arsenal season, wasn't it? We had Christmas off in January, and then it was the glorious, February to April /May
Yeah.
Or didn't they do really well but just fell short again? Well, what
Glorious
if that happens?
failure.
If that happens one season, that's all right. That was happening like fucking 10 years in a row. That was Arsenal's season. You knew what was going to happen. You didn't have to watch Arsenal. You could draw the line from the start of the season to the end of the season for Arsenal. You could draw it. It'd go like that, it'd go like that, and it'd go like that again. You know, and sure as shit, we were getting knocked out of the Champions League by Bayern Munich or Barcelona. You know, they just rotated each season. That was Arsenal for about, for me, what felt like 10 years. That was Arsenal.
Yep.
Yeah, you're right. Fires, we spoke in the last episode of this about the season Eduardo broke his leg and throwing the title away. Was this the biggest missed opportunity for you, do you think?
Yeah, when you frame it as you've done, like, Leicester winning the league, all the other teams having a year off. I often look at that season as just showing you how shit we were. It was, we could have won it then. We could have. I mean, we didn't. Leicester won it. And I make Nathan right. Leicester were. It wasn't just those three players he mentioned: Kante, Vardy, Mahrez, were sensational, and their recruitment was outstanding. I don't think they cost more than like 10 million quid all three of them put together. But it was the other players they had, like, who I just never heard from again, had outstanding seasons. Danny Simpson, right back, like Wes Morgan, centre back. Some Japanese player, Okazaki or something like that. I might be just guessing that name. But they were really good. They were really important moments. The Tinker Man didn't tinker because he didn't have any players to tinker with. So there was all of that. There was, but Arsenal should have done better that year because we had the players. We had the run on everybody. But I'll make Nathan right again. It was just as sure as shit, mate. We were every time either November/December rolled around, we'd be out of the League Cup, take a few defeats, make it January, and February, we'd be out of Champions League, and finding some conspiracy reason as to why we were out of everything by that point. And it would happen every year, every single year, and it happened that year too. And injuries were taking their toll because I remember just everyone being injured all at the same time. I can just remember like discounting games like Anfield, just thinking, there's no point in watching this game. Like, we're going to get slapped. So we can sit there and say this was a good chance for us to win the league. I mean, the fact is we didn't. Leicester came in one, and Leicester were like 10,000 to 1 to win the league that year. And we finished second, third that year. As you said, Tottenham could have won it that year. They didn't, which is hilarious.
They probably should have at one stage as well, shouldn't they?
They had good players. They had better players than we did,
well.
even though they couldn't beat us. But they had better players than we did. They couldn't win it because I think Chelsea decided to stop them in that game at Stamford Bridge, wasn't it? So I don't know, mate. For me, it's always just a barometer of how shit we were, because everything aligned for us. We talk about our recent Champions League run and about how teams, the way we played, things aligned for us and the stars for us to get a run to the final. We had that with this season. Did nothing with it. Even at Christmas, lads. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I remember it. I remember sitting there going, we will never get a better chance to win a league title. Just to squeeze one in. Fuck next year, which would have been the year after that league. Just do me a favour and go and buy a defender. Any defender. Someone who's half decent. Just go and buy him. 20, 30 million quid, you win the league. Did we fuck? Did we sign anyone? No.
Well,
we didn't.
The famous Petr Cech summer, and then it'd been El Neni was the only signing in January, wasn't it? And people like El Neni, but he wasn't. He was a nice squad player, wasn't he? But not much more than that.
But this is what we were relegated to, mate. We were relegated to, like, never heard of him. Arsène likes him. Let's see what he does. But that's not what the world was doing around us. So you asked a really important question not so long ago, where did football leave him behind? This was the evidence that it was happening.
Yeah.
There was no bigger indicator that you were in a 2-horse race and you're a horse and they're a pony and you couldn't keep up. So for all the ratings we give these players, nah, mate. Unfortunately, it looked good on paper, but they couldn't turn up when we needed them most. Couldn't turn up because, we know we'd go to White Hart Lane and be lucky to get a draw. We'd go to Anfield lucky to not get battered. Everyone had Stamford Bridge was a mauling every time we went there. So it just became, by that point, it was the banter years had well and truly begun, lads.
Yeah. It's, pretty dark time, I suppose. But I do think it was when fans, even some of the most loyal Wenger fans, started to turn, hadn't they? It was. I was never Wenger out. I was. I would never do that to him, but I think even some of the most loyal fans started to question at that time, didn't they?
I'd never have done that. They're just pricks.
Yeah,
they're just pricks.
Yeah. It was rough. For almost 20 years, Arsène Wenger had united Arsenal fans. Then suddenly he divided them. There were arguments in the stands, arguments about tactics, but they ended up becoming quite personal, didn't they? At times, it was Wenger in, Wenger out. You disagree with your family, you disagree with your friends. There was, I think I don't know about you too, but match days become quite an uncomfortable place to be. The manager who transformed Arsenal Football Club ended up becoming its most divisive figure. So, when did you two, Nath, when did you first sort of start to think that it was time to move on? Was it at this stage, or were you already there?
No, I was. I didn't want him to go. I didn't want him to go. I knew that it would come to an end at some point. I knew probably deep down that the end was now, kind of thing. But at the time, I just thought, it wasn't so much just a Wenger problem for me. It was all the antics going on upstairs, who was running the show. They were all fighting amongst themselves. They all wanted their piece of the pie and all that kind of stuff. It was just for me, Arsène was the only thing that I recognised as Arsenal at the time. He for me felt like the stability, which was probably the wrong way to look at it, really. It was probably sort of like saving him a little bit. But yeah, I genuinely didn't want him to go. Even when he went, I didn't want him to go. I couldn't see anybody out there that would come in and do a better job with what we had at the time. And I actually think that ended up being true, because I don't think it started getting better until the upstairs stuff had been sorted out and that battle had been won, and the blood had dried and been washed away or whatever upstairs. And then the Cronkies started to sit down and go, right, what are we doing? And then built the project from the top down, kind of thing. So I like Emery. I really like Emery, and I think he's a fantastic manager. But it got worse. I think it was always going to get worse before it got better. But yeah, I think Arsène would have done a better job just by staying. Maybe I'm a bit too loyal to Wenger, but yeah, I didn't want him to go. I just didn't think it was the right time. I thought he was the only thing at the club where there was any sort of stability. But yeah, the trigger would have had to have been pulled at some point.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. I think for me, at the end, Wenger the coach was still a great coach. I think it was the other stuff that had maybe passed him by a little bit more. The transfer market, all of those things. He was still, I don't know, being like a purist, I guess. When no one else was acting that way, were they? Far as I know, you got a lot of opinions on that sort of side of things. I mean, do you think that Wenger just got left behind by these other clubs?
Just really quickly,
Yeah.
very quickly. I think he lost a lot of his allies in that upstairs battle as well.
Yeah.
I think the relationship with David Dean, I'd love to have a deep dive on that. That was a really close relationship, a very successful relationship as well, by the way. Maybe not so much towards the end, but certainly very successful. I think losing David Dean was a big impact. I think when Pat Rice went as well, I don't think that helped. It maybe just could have done with someone, maybe with some fresh ideas, someone with modern ideas to come in to the coaching staff and maybe have Wenger's ear a little bit. That would have helped. But I think come the end, he was kind of on his own, wasn't he?
Definitely was.
Yeah, it's I don't disagree with any of that. I think what successful managers do is they're insulated from certain parts of decision making, and they're left to do what's best. And David Dean making a move to buy the club, not personally, but on behalf of, like, I think it was Usmanov at the time, and then that falling through, and then the board sort of turning against him, and then he had to go. And I think I remember seeing or reading somewhere that when David Dean left, Arsène Wenger wanted to go as well, but David Dean convinced him to stay on. Just kind of meant that I think Arsene's kind of modus at that point was to just kind of save the club almost, and take this kind of like moral crusade on about doing the thing properly in face of like nation state clubs and like Russian money laundering operations and stuff like that. But and then we've spoken about this stuff before, but ultimately I don't doubt his ability as a coach. I think the game moved on, and I think we collectively all had like Stockholm syndrome at that point. I think we were all afraid of what leaving this person would do to us. And we let really, really top coaches go past. And when he did leave was too late. Not because he should have stayed. Not at all. I think he should have gone earlier. If he'd have gone earlier, there was a young Jurgen Klopp. There was a much younger Guardiola. Maybe he wouldn't have come because we wouldn't have given him enough money. But there was a few managers, lads. There was I think Guardiola was out of work at the time. I think Luis Enrique was at Barcelona at some point. But the point is, like, we have this conversation within fans, like, who did we get? We got Emery. That was a bad decision. That's just a bad decision. He just wasn't a good fit for the club. And someone would have suffered, but then we say that, and then we gave it to a complete novice, and it worked. So there's a lot to be said about us as a fan base refusing to move on, just still hammering at this same nail, thinking that things are going to work. They weren't going to work, lads. It just wasn't going to work. And yes, I make Nathan right. I think that the board things clearing up, the board issues clearing up by the time Arteta was secure and in place. Because we still had Gazidis and people like that who were just fucking jokers, mate. So, that all kind of coalesced at the right time for Arteta. But on Wenger's thing, he should have gone earlier, lads. And that pain was going to come either way. The problem that I had, lads, is I love Arsène Wenger. I love for what he did for our football club. I loved what he stood for as a manager. All the ethics and treating the players like people, and and then those players then going out and then running through a wall for him were all great, but he'd lost an edge, and we're in an elite football institution. And for me, it felt like, I'll tell you a personal story. My dad, who I love to bits, and he's like my hero. I remember being about sort of 18, 19 years old and having a conversation with my dad and realizing my dad isn't Superman. He's actually got the thing that we were talking about was just completely wrong. And I was like, wow, Dad, like you couldn't be more wrong about this, but I love you. So we continued and it was to do with my dad's businesses at the time. And I was a young man, I was listening to him and I was like, I love my dad, but he's completely wrong here. Like things have moved on. Like, you know, you're gonna find yourself the things that worked for you, your strengths in the past were now your weaknesses because the world had changed around you. And I couldn't give you a better example of how I felt about Arsène Wenger. He just felt like my dad. He'd just gone past a point now where the things that made Arsène Wenger great were now his biggest weaknesses. He was too loyal to players. He was too loyal. He was too idealistic in a industry that had become like completely focused on performance metrics and commercialism. And he was this artist trying to paint the perfect mosaic again. There's no space for that, mate. That world was too ruthless now. And he suffered, but his love, again, which was one of his greatest strengths, became our weakness. And at some point, you've got to say, Dad, just move to one side, mate. Time's up. You know, go in a garden and work on some oranges and tomatoes now. Yeah. Just let other people take over, mate. And we'll suffer for a little bit, but we'll get it back again. And that's how I feel about Arsène Wenger. I think he went too late. I think he should have gone earlier. And some of the legacy stuff that we had was because he stayed too long. Some of the legacy issues we had because he stayed too long. And I said a bit earlier that I felt like Özil and Sánchez signed for Wenger, not for Arsenal. And that was the only thing going for Wenger at that point. And I think once he'd lost that, and he did, on his 1000th game, they went and got slapped 6-0 at Stamford Bridge. It's a laughing stock, mate. Should have gone after them. 8-2 should have gone after them. Like he should have. At some point, he's got to realise that these players that he was going out and going out and defending and going out on a limb for was shit. He backed the wrong horse. He backed the wrong horse in David Dean, and now he was backing these players. And I just wish he'd have been. It's a double-edged sword, really. I just wish he'd have been more selfish about his own career, and in that he would have liberated us as well. And it just hang on too long. And after that point, where there's few points when he won a cup and stuff and whatever, you know, if he'd have gone then, we would have gone through the pain and we would have come out the other side. There were some elite managers out there who then, obviously, you don't know who Jurgen Klopp is until he becomes Jurgen Klopp at Liverpool and whatever, right? You know, but I just feel like Arsenal would never. Arsenal went through a period about 5 years where they wouldn't have dreamed of sacking him when they probably should have, or at least sat down with him and said, "We're going to move on this year." Do you know what I mean? And they didn't do it. Arsenal didn't have the balls to do it. Arsène didn't have the balls to do it, and we as fans were like, we didn't have the balls to do it, so we just carry on until it's absolutely inevitable, and then it became toxic, and then it became. But none of those things had to happen. Had a grown up been in the room, or somebody willing to take the responsibility and say, I did this, I made that decision, I made that critical decision to part company because it wasn't working, it was toxic. And by the time he did leave, we couldn't attract those players. We couldn't attract the players to rebuild. We didn't have a project to sign up to. We went, I know me and Nath differ on Emery. I think Emery's shit, but you know, with Emery, he's a consultant, mate. He's a UEFA Cup specialist, and it was almost like we were saying, "All right, then, go on, then. Yeah, all right. Look, he wins a couple of cups and stuff. Let's get him on board." We had no idea. We were rudderless. We weren't going anywhere, and there's an argument to be made that that would have happened anyway. But I would have preferred if it happened in a way where we won something. Arsène Wenger went out on a positive, with all the respect he deserves, all of that. But some of the things that were happening, lads, I mean, come on, they're undeniable, mate. 6-0 at Chelsea, and we knew they were going to batter us. It's not as if we didn't know that. We knew they were going to batter us. We looked like children in front of them, mate. We were turning up with like Kieran Gibbs and like Coquelin and players like that who were like, yeah, great, you know, the fuck are they going to do against Chelsea's midfield? They were going to do nothing. But we believed because Arsène was there, and it was all just misplaced. And it was sad. It was sad because that man gave me some of the greatest memories of my life as an Arsenal fan, without doubt. We played some of the most sensational football. I've seen the best players I've ever seen play for the Arsenal play under Wenger, and there was a time when he was untouchable, but time left him behind, and us, unfortunately. So,
yeah. I mean, I don't want to give them too much of a shout out here, but I don't think we can talk about this period without talking a little bit about Arsenal fan TV and that sort of side of things. Nath, do you think that things like Arsenal fan TV were born because of the division created, or do you think they are the things that created the division? Almost a bit of a chicken and egg sort of situation. Like, what do you think was that? Sorry, was the root of that?
Yeah, I think it coincided nicely with the rise of social media, didn't it? I think you've got to look
Twitter
at
boom, wasn't it? Really,
it was a massive boom, weren't it? People were just starting to discover that this wasn't like this. This is going back a bit even further for me, but like I remember my dad discovering Friends Reunited, and it was absolutely.
I remember that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and buzzing about that kind of thing, and people were just starting to discover that it wasn't just for chatting with your mates. You could actually start putting opinions out there, and people wanted to listen to those opinions. It was a platform where you could take what was happening on the terraces, where you were in front of 60,000 people. You could take that to an audience of millions of people, and I think the timing was very much sort of a big part of Arsenal TV. But I think for me, in the chicken and the egg argument, I think it starts in the stands. I think when anything starts to go to shit at a club in terms of the fans' thought process, if you're asking me now, it all starts on social media. There are two sets of fans at a club. There's probably more, but in the broad scheme of things, there's two sets of fans. There's your true fans who are there through thick and thin. It's my club. We know there's going to be shit. We know there's going to be good. We're going to complain about it, but we're also going to cheer about it. And then you've got the social media brigade who just talk complete shit. And this isn't a dig at Arsenal fans. This is a dig at every fan club that has those social media people. Arsenal is probably one of the worst for it. Let's be honest. Arsenal Twitter is just an absolute cesspool, isn't it? But at this point, don't get me wrong. Yeah, I'll sit and doom scroll for hours watching the videos, listening to people talk absolute tripe, and having a right good laugh about it. But I think going back to what you asked, Dave, I think at this era, at this point, it started in the ground. That I don't like saying this because it's not true, but the hardcore fans who go home and away, who promote themselves as being proper fans because they go to the ground. It's like, mate, there's 60,000 fans of a fan base of millions and millions. We're not all getting tickets. We don't all have that luxury to be able to get to the fucking ground. I'd love to do it. I do not have the cash, and the fact that I live as far north as north gets to some people, doesn't help. Doesn't make me any less of a fan. Do you know what I mean? That's a different argument. I think in this era, it starts in the stands, doesn't it? That's where the discontent starts. That's where the rumbling starts. You start to hear the odd section start booing. It's like, oh, that's new. That's not happened before. And then it starts growing. You go down for your halftime pie and pint. And you've got the crazy guy who's always negative, even if you're in a fucking invincible season. He's going off about all the negative stuff, and then all of a sudden, in the negative times, other people go, he might not be batshit crazy. He might actually have a bit of a point here. And then it starts spreading around the ground. And then the game ends, you come out the ground, you start talking to your mates, it starts spreading again. And then, as we just said, social media was getting bigger and bigger, and people seeing the opportunity and people buying into it. So I think at the time, it started in the stands. And then, stuff like Arsenal TV sort of grabbed a hold of it and went, actually, this can be bigger. We can push this right to the forefront of everything. And fair play to him at the time. It was a genius move. It really was. But we talk about Wenger getting left behind. Have we moved into a different sphere? Probably. But yeah, I think at the time that's where it started.
Yeah, I think you're right. Well, you've both already mentioned it a little bit, but let's get into some of that boardroom, changes and issues. Obviously, football was changing, across Europe. Teams were modernising. There were sporting directors coming in more and more. Recruitment departments, analytics. Lots of shared responsibility. But Arsenal, it was basically Wenger doing all of those things, wasn't it? For perhaps the first time in his time with Arsenal, he was looking isolated, without David Dein, with some of his other allies that we said. Do you think David Dein, to me, David Dein was always the one that, I think Wenger maybe is a little bit risk averse, especially in like the transfer market. For me, David Dein was always the one going, no, do it. Almost like the devil on his shoulder or whichever side you want to look at it as. Do you think David Dein going almost sort of took away that, I don't know, bit of riskiness from Wenger?
Yeah, amongst other things. I think it's not dissimilar to if you're at work and your manager's your mate.
Yeah.
And then suddenly your manager leaves and you get this right bastard that comes in, you're like, you try to be his mate and he's like, he just doesn't want to talk to you. He's got his own mates. And then work becomes really shit then. And all the little things you'd get away with just kind of goes, look, and you just think, well, look, I used to have David Dein. We'd have a glass of wine. We'd talk about like, south of France and stuff like that. And now you've got, essentially a man who works for the cartel, a mobile phone salesman, and some bald-headed fella that no one ever knew where he was from. And like you're just sitting there going, well, this is fucking bollocks. Like, I can't work with these people, mate. They're shit. And I think Wenger knew when he saw these people that he was. Look at the fucking state of them. I mean, honestly, mate. Look, Wenger must have looked at him and just gone, "This is bollocks, mate." I came from the marble. I walked into the marble halls. Great sort of like almost English statesman that welcomed me. Shirt and tie wearing and everything. And now this new elite team, we just look like fucking ponces, like This is who I've got to work with now. Is this what is look at what you've made me become, sort of thing. Like, is this what I worked for? So I have sympathy with him, mate. And, you must have gone into meetings with these lads and just thought, for fuck's sake, just buy who you want, mate. And that was that. And the proof in the pudding is where these guys ended up. I mean, I think Raul's gone back to working for the cartel. Gazidis got fired from AC Milan and Vinay's at Tottenham. And like, just think, but this was all part of us moving from one stage to another. And the David Dein question is an interesting one. I think people look back on him fondly. It comes down to backing the wrong horse, lads. Arsène Wenger just backed the wrong horse. He backed his mate, and his mate got ousted. And in backing his mate, he put his cards on the table. So the rest of the board were like, oh, okay, where's your mate now? Do you know what I mean? And then that's an unfortunate part of like this kind of corporate thing. And like, but I don't really, at this point, I loved Arsène Wenger. Whatever he said was gospel. And as you get a bit older, you start thinking, you shouldn't really love someone you never met, lads. It's a bit much. You know what I mean? And as football fans, that's a bit weird, but you get a bit older, you get a bit grey, and you think, don't know if you should invest that much emotion in someone, because Arsène Wenger works for FIFA now, lads. Where are all those ethics and morals that we aspired to be under Arsène Wenger, under Arsène Wenger? Where are they now? He's not had a word to say about Infantino, has he? And how disappointing is that, mate? So, like, you kind of, I think at the time we were caught up in I think we all became a little bit like Wenger. we all became like romantics about stuff, and like we still play the best football though. Or we still like, it doesn't matter. You lot are, whatever. And like ultimately, we became a bit of a shit show. And I don't want to blame David Dean leaving, but that was obviously seismic for Arsène Wenger. And you know what? He should have gone when Dean went, and he should have gone when something. But that period until he left, from the moment he probably was a little not unmotivated to manage Arsenal, but less motivated to manage Arsenal. At that point, had he have left, I think we would have got over it. We'd have still gone through a rehab process. We still would have gone through being shit for a while. But that period is when Arsenal became toxic. And just going back to the AFTV thing, and, I don't want to give them credit for like, seeing a mountain from miles away. Everyone could see it, mate. Yeah. They were just the only bastards that decided to go and make money out of it. We live in a negative attention economy. If I sit on this podcast and just spend the next hour calling everyone a dirty bastard, we'll probably go viral, because that's just the way the economy works online. So where are they now? What are their numbers now? Now we're league champions. What are their numbers? Who's the AFTV equivalent of Man City? There isn't one, because they've been winning a lot. Yeah. So like, these things, as Nathan said, they come down, they're top down. Do you know what I mean? So these are driven by the club, and if the club's successful, Robbie hasn't got a job. He's gonna have to go get a real job, and not be on not pretend to love the Arsenal. So it's just one of those things, mate. These were all birthed by, in some cases, the worst decision you can make is no decision. And I felt like we went through a period of like 5 years of indecision. No one wanted to bulk at actually doing the job that was required. We all tried to paper over cracks, and these three monkeys were part of it as well. Do you know what I mean? So yeah, get rid of that photo. That's annoying me now, Dave.
Yeah, I've got to keep these up because, driving that rage in you. Nath, obviously, as mentioned, Wenger was a bit on his own at this time. Do you think he deserved more support from these? Or do you think they should have just taken some of those responsibilities for him that he seemed to take on himself?
I just think that, going back to what I said about, Wenger being the only stability at the time, I think the war that was going on upstairs kind of meant that Wenger had to shoulder it, because no one else was. They were all looking out for themselves. They were all trying to be the number one man. You've got a picture there of three people who all wanted to be number one, and the knives were out. Like, the knives were out in a big, big way. It was just a mess. It was such a mess. So yeah, I don't think Wenger had a choice. Is where I would go with this. I genuinely just don't think he had a choice. I think there were some things that were getting overlooked and not being picked up that he looked at and went, well, someone needs to do something. We can't leave these things. It's like when someone leaves a job, like Faiz was saying before about, when you become best mates with your boss, like when one of your team leaves, that work doesn't just stand still. Someone still has to pick that work up until the next person comes in, through the interview stage or whatever, and that could take weeks, it could take months, but that work needs to be done. So someone has to pick it up. So while these idiots were all fighting amongst themselves, Wenger's lost all his mates, rightly or wrongly. Like if I said he backed the wrong horse, fair enough. He did. He backed the wrong horse. David Dean backed the wrong horse in that fight upstairs. So, was it his own fault? Maybe a little bit, but by the same token, he still had that responsibility to go, I need to pick up these jobs because no one else is doing it, because they're all fighting amongst themselves. So yeah, I think, he needed help from someone, and no one was giving it because they were all too interested in their own agendas. That's how it looked to me anyway.
Yeah, mate, you're right. Well, I think we've done a lot of negative Wenger talk in this, because I think, it's hard not to. But I do think we should round it out this episode with, a bit of a love in for Arsene. We don't have to just keep it to Emirates era. So, Fires, John, chat about some of the good times of Wenger and what he meant as an Arsenal fan to you.
Arsène Wenger, without doubt, was and is it was the personification of things that I liked in football. It was the artistry behind it. It was the love of the game. It was putting players who were creative above players who were mercenaries or jobsworths or just limited. It was going back to the essence of what I love about football, which is getting with your mates, putting players where they're supposed to fit, and like just being the best you can be, and having fun. It was the best time ever. What he meant to me as a person is why I'm so critical of him now. It's out of love, mate. You don't criticize people that you're indifferent about. So if over the last couple of episodes and before I've spoken about Wenger, it's come across as anti-Wenger and all that stuff, it's because I genuinely love the man. He was brilliant. He was a foreign manager to come into the UK. Man United were absolutely dominating everybody. He got right up Ferguson's nose. When Ferguson started asking people, who's this guy that turns up from Japan and telling me this, there was a mystery about the man. Unlike most people, I've got a lot of time for the French. I've lived over there for a little bit. I like it. I like the French kind of the arrogance that comes with it, the kind of the arrogance, the artistry, the kind of believing that you're kind of your ideals are much higher than other people's. I enjoy all that stuff, and he just and anything negative that I say about him is genuinely from a position of love and disappointment. And because you love someone, you're disappointed by them. And it was the best time of my life. We played the best football I've ever seen my club play. We've had the best players. There were players there whose careers would have been 50% of what they were if it wasn't for Arsène Wenger. There are, like I always say, lads, Thierry Henry was one of the best players to have ever played football, and that doesn't happen unless Arsène Wenger's involved. Patrick Vieira is one of the best midfielders I've ever seen play football, and that doesn't happen unless Arsène Wenger's there. So it was the knitting of Arsenal's past with Arsenal's future, which he delivered immediately, which I thought was magnificent. And as an achievement, doing the unbeaten season, to do that, there's a reason why it's not happened for 100 years and probably won't happen again, for another 100. It's because he was a dreamer. And as football fans, what else are you apart from just being dreamers? Once in a while it comes off, unless you're fucking cheating bastards. But apart from that, you work towards this grand idea where everyone can pull together and we can create something amazing and pull off something unheard of. But you very rarely get to realize it. And with Arsène Wenger, I realized a lot of the things that I identified with, personally. The fact that he played, it didn't matter where the player came from. He played them. He'd give trials to people from unknown places in the world and suddenly turn them into a world-class football. I loved all that. He signed Sol Campbell on a free from Tottenham. All that kind of stuff. It's if I was to list all the things that I love about Arsène Wenger, there's not enough time on this podcast. There really isn't. And the drop-off is the drop-off. And like I said to you guys earlier about my dad, it doesn't change the fact that I love him any less. I don't love him any less. It's just that, it had to end. And whenever it was going to end, it was going to be painful. And in the end, his ending at Arsenal Football Club was sad more than anything. For all the reasons we've mentioned. but it was always going to be said. What a man. And I will forever be grateful to him for the best time ever. And we're over it now. We're league champions again. We've gone full circle, and it's over. And I'll forever be grateful to him. He's a great man. And I'll leave it at that.
That's good. Knife, go on, far away.
I mean, fucking hell, mate, you set me up here, haven't you? How'd you follow that? I agree with everything that Faiz has said. I mean, for me, it was in those following Arsenal when Wenger was in charge. For me, I was in those years where football really was life and death. It was my whole life. It was my whole weekend. Nothing else mattered really. No, there wasn't anything else that mattered. My mood would depend on how Arsenal had done at the weekend, which towards the end of Wenger's era wasn't great. Probably wasn't a nice person to be around. But for me, I've spoken about this before. Football is about the style, is about the romance. I'm all about it. I'm all in on that side of it. Would I like more trophies? Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, probably would. But who wouldn't? Even Manchester City fans would say that they would want more. But in terms of style, in terms of what Arsène Wenger brought, it was phenomenal. Like, that is how football should be played for me. The liquid football. There were times when the opponent would get a corner and I'd be super confident that we'd score from it. I was quite. There were games where I was begging us to concede a corner because I knew that we could go and score from it. Who does that? Who has that mentality? The other thing that Wenger doesn't get a lot of credit for is the Premier League wouldn't be the Premier League without him. The Premier League as it is now doesn't happen, or is 10, 20 years behind where it is now. What he brought with him, his ideas off the field in terms of nutrition, sports science, simple stretches, exercises. You read all the books from the Arsenal players who were there when he arrived, and the culture change that he brought was seismic. It was a different planet that anyone was used to performing at. And he brought in someone like Dennis Bergkamp, who was already living that lifestyle, to show the others how to do it. I think it was in Ian Wright's autobiography, or one of the many podcasts he's done or whatever, and he said that the players were like, he's phenomenal. If that's what he's doing, I'm going to do that too. And Wenger brought that mentality, and then brought someone who was already living that mentality in terms of Bergkamp. And that's not why he signed Bergkamp, don't get me wrong, but it married up to that vision, and sort of said to the other players, especially the English core, look at this guy. I'm telling you to do this, and you're not really buying into it. Well, here's a guy who's bought into it, and he's phenomenal. So you need to follow me, and he earned that trust. But yeah, I'll love him forever. I loved him before he went. I didn't want him to go. I still loved him at that point. When, like, it's a bit morbid, but like when celebrities die, there's certain ones, and you go, fucking hell, that's a big one. That's. Like, for example, I don't want to curse him or anything, but David Attenborough, everyone's going to go, shit, for one reason or another, we're all going to feel that one, aren't we? It's just a weird one. When Wenger goes, I'm going to be devastated, mate. It's going to be like losing a family member. It really, and that's so dramatic. It's so dramatic and silly to think like that, but genuinely, that is how I'm going to feel about it. Like Fai said, some of the best times of my life are because of Arsène Wenger and what he brought to Arsenal Football Club. For a manager to have the audacity to walk into a dressing room and go, we are going to go unbeaten next season, like you say, he's a dreamer. No one has the arrogance to go in and say that. No one thinks that that's realistic, but he did. And not only did he think it, he did it. He then followed it up within a year and did it. People go on like, oh, well, you drew like 14 games, mate. No one looks at how many draws there are. There's a big fat 0 in the loss column. That is stupid. You don't do that. You don't do that. That's ridiculous. It's just stuff like that. Do you know what I mean? I'll love him forever. That's what I'll end on. I will love him forever because he made me fall in love with football.
Yeah,
it wasn't just a game anymore. It wasn't. It was all in. That watching Wenger transform Arsenal with the likes of Henry and Perez and Sol Campbell and all those signings, Patrick Vieira, I fell in love with football because of Arsène Wenger.
Yeah.
What about you, Dave?
They're a tough couple to follow there, but for me, I think Wenger really bookended my time as a proper, full-out football fanatic. When he came to us, I was about 8. I was also a fan under George Graham, but I think I was truly fell in love with football under Wenger, and I think part of that was down to the football he was playing and what he brought. But just everything about the man was just pure class, and I think it was just an absolute match made in heaven with Arsenal at the time. He was just, the football we played was incredible. How he acted was incredible. He really did. I think so many people just thought Man United were just going to go on and win everything forever, didn't they? And he did make us a genuine challenger. And I think maybe we probably should have had another league title or 2 in that run. I think you could look back and maybe they didn't win enough trophies, even taking out the trophy drought and stuff. There should have probably been another league or 2 in there somewhere. But, the fact he never won the Champions League is just so disgraceful, really. We really should have won one, I think, in his time with us. But, I think the end of Wenger was the time when I started falling out of love with football. And as we've discussed before, I don't think I've ever really found my way back. Those final few years when people were, people just laying into him all the time at the ground. It was just, it is like your dad or your granddad, isn't it? It was just it was horrible, and it really did make me fall out of love with football, I think. And a big part of that was the fact that the way people treated him at the end was just far too much. I get if you pointed him out, but there were people that hated him. And for me, no matter what people say, he is our greatest manager of all time, and probably I'll be very surprised if there's anyone who ends up better than him, to be honest. People throw George Graham around. It's not even close. He won us some stuff, but that man left in disgrace, went to Tottenham. That just destroys not any legacy, but he's not a greatest manager ever. Before that, I'm not going to debate Herbert Chapman versus Wenger, but Wenger revolutionised football. He revolutionised our club. He changed everything for us. The fact there's not an Arsène Wenger stand at the Emirates really irritates me. We got the East and the West stand that just crying out to be named after him, I think. But I think for me, when he left, I was 29 or 30. I think just about to turn 30. I think that really, I think like you said earlier, Fide, I think you get to a point when you realise that, you don't necessarily love these people, or, it's not the same. I think it was around that time. I think it all just, the period of Wenger really coincided with me of the times when, I really did love football the most. And I don't think I'll ever love football the same as I did under Wenger. I don't think I'll ever love Arsenal the same as I did under Wenger. No matter what happens, we could win the quadruple next year. I don't think it will ever feel to me the same as it did, some of them titles under him, which, it's sad in a way, but I think it's just one of them things that happens in life. You get other priorities. I've got wife, kids now and stuff. Football isn't my be and end all, where, like Nave said, where if we lost, I'd have been unhappy all weekend. Now, it is what it is. But I think Wenger just was that period for me, and I'll love him forever. And like Nate said, I didn't want him to go at the end. It was probably the right decision, but I didn't want him to go. I'd be happy for him to still be there now, to be honest. But it might not look too good, but I'd probably still rather be it with him at the helm. But
do you know? Just I told you a lot about my old man and stuff. Like, I look at this photo, and my dad's delighted, mate. My dad he's got an enclosure full of pigeons that he likes looking after, and he feeds them and whatever, and he grows oranges and strawberries, and me and my mum laugh at him and go, look, because my dad always said he'd never retire. and it suited him. It fitted him like a glove. And he says to me now, look, Faisal, I should have just done that a few years earlier, shouldn't I have? And I look at this picture now of Wenger, and I think, I don't hate you, mate. You are responsible for so much happiness in my life, and I'm happy that you decided to just leave football altogether, because he could have been like a Mourinho and like just gone down the leagues and gone down to different clubs and still tried to be Mourinho, but just ended up being a prat and like, and just kicking off between Besiktas and Galatasaray or whatever he was doing, Fenerbahce or whatever it was. And like, no one gives a shit, mate. Just, whatever, Mourinho. And he didn't. He just, and I think the greatest example of him realizing that he was done with football and that football had kind of moved on past him was that he decided not to be a manager anymore. And I think it's almost in the most perfect tribute to Arsène Wenger. It was poetry, and it ended properly. It ended how it's supposed to end. And not all great dramas have a happy ending, mate, but they're still great.
Yeah.
And that's what Arsène Wenger is. It's a great man.
I think it was great that he announced that he was leaving with a little bit of time spare, because I think the whole atmosphere changed for that last, was it about a month or so, I think, between him announcing it and the end. I think, up to that point, it was like, Wenger out, fuck Wenger sort of stuff. And then even like the biggest of those people sort of turned into, that last sort of few weeks did become a bit of a, a tribute to him, and influenced the game, and people were singing his name again, which, did sort of, it was nice that he got to go out that way rather than, maybe just called it time after the season.
Yeah, and you make a good point, Dave. We go through, look, as fans, we don't own the club, we don't own shares in it. It's not financially linked to us in any kind of way. We're just custodians that pass this love on to another generation, right? And any fan who claims to be more than that, or because you go to games and stuff or you go to, you're part of a club where mate, you're there because of your friends. You wouldn't do that on your toddler, you're there because of other reasons, social reasons. Okay, you love the club as well, that's great, but it doesn't make you any more or less of it doesn't make your connection with that club any more or less. It's a completely internal procedure, and so we're custodians where we hold this club in our hearts until another generation comes along. And I'm a little bit older than you, lads, so I would have seen a little bit more of George Graham, and people who are older than me would have seen more of George Graham, and then would have had less patience with Arsène Wenger. And then the people who came along after you lads, for example, would have been in their 20s when you lads were in your 30s, and they would have just known no trophies and just pure banter, and they would have hated it. And they then turn to start flying banners over the stadium saying Wenger out, or turning up at the darts, or in America somewhere at basketball or an NFL game going Wenger out. No one knows, no one's got a clue what that's about, and it all just became quite farcical. And that was probably the time when some of the worst parts of our fan base were sort of exposed to the world. But ultimately, what you can never do is take away that feeling that this man introduced in my heart, that is timeless. That's absolutely timeless, and that will last forever. Not as in the heart of in our hearts as fans, but it will last in the annals of history, and that can't be taken away from Arsène Wenger. And ultimately, when you do look back at something, I think in a totally Arsène type of way, you've just got to be thankful and be grateful for it, and allow the happiness of that time to come to the fore. Everything else we talk about, myself included, especially myself on this podcast, talking about all the negative stuff, the boardroom, the this, that, we'll never know what actually happened to a T. We'll never know who crossed what T and who dotted what I and what happened and whatnot. We're never going to know the truth behind innuendo and rumor. So then it does become after the discussion, it becomes kind of pointless. What remains is his history, his legacy. And for us, for me personally, it's one of pride and it's one of grace. And I think if I remember Arsène Wenger for one thing was that he was graceful.
Yeah. Well, I sort of wish I'd left this as the ending, really, but we have got to do our defining players of the era still.
Is it? Oh, all right then.
Yeah.
I should have saved it.
Yeah, we should have ended on that because it would have been a nice way to end. Let's do the defining players of the era. Nath, do you want to go first? 2014 to 2018 when Wenger left.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here, aren't you? I think for defining player, I'm gonna say Mesut Özil. And I it's not my favourite player of the era, but for the defining player, it's Özil, because the impact of the signing, it brought a buzz to the Emirates for the first time. But I also think he kind of shows the negatives as well of that period. I think he sums up and defines that era, both good and bad. When he wanted to play football, he genuinely was one of the best players in the world. When he genuinely wanted to do it, he was fabulous. I remember a Champions League game. I think it was a group game, and I think it was against Napoli, and we were 3-0 up after 20 minutes. And I'd never seen a player do what Özil was doing. He tore them to complete pieces with unbelievable ease. And bear in mind, this was a very good Napoli team at the time as well. But I also think that his sort of ability to down tools, be a bit disinterested, kind of not have that fighting spirit. We lacked that fight in that era, and I think Özil defined that. So as a defining player, Mesut Özil.
Okay. Fires, what about you?
Are you going to let me say Aaron Ramsey, or do you want to say it?
Well, you can as well, but obviously I'm saying Aaron Ramsey.
Right,
you can have Aaron Ramsey as well.
I'll go someone else. No, I'll go someone else because you've decided to go with Aaron Ramsey. And I thought you might do that, so I didn't want to steal your.
What gave you that impression?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I wonder what you've said about 1,000 times in the WhatsApp group and nearly fallen out with Nathan over. That gave away that perhaps you may choose Aaron Ramsey. For me, the defining player of that generation was Jack Wilshere. And Jack Wilshere, for the sake of growing up as a young Hale End boy, occasionally getting to train with the superstars that were at Arsenal, which were the back end of Arsene's successful period, coming through that one performance against Barcelona where he was magnificent, and so much rested on his shoulders. That was a future Arsenal captain. That was England's linchpin in midfield. It was everything. It was an Englishman that had completely grown up in the Arsène Wenger mold of football. And he, for me, was the perfect personification of European technical ability on the ball, playing the ball really late, attracting perhaps too much attention on the pitch, but having that kind of ability. I've not seen an England player do that again since. And then the beautiful tragedy that came with it, the body giving way, the start, then the rebirth, and the rebirth again, and the rebirth again, and followed by tragedy again, and you were like, when is this guy going to get a break? And so for me, considering the fact that I could have easily have picked Özil, my favorite player of that generation was Alexis Sánchez, obviously, but I could have gone with Özil, who was one of my favorite players in the world at the time when he signed. I make Nathan right. Never seen a buzz like it before, and again at the stadium when we bought him. And Aaron Ramsey was magnificent. But I don't know if you remember this photo that Arsène Wenger had of these 5 English lads that we'd all renewed their contracts. Yeah. It was like Ox, Carl Jenkinson,
wasn't it?
Yeah, Gibbs
would have been
Ramsey.
I can't think of else. Yeah,
and Wilshere.
Oh, Wilshere. Yeah,
and and I remember thinking, do you know what? I'm not sure if I rate any of these apart from Wilshere and Ramsey, but that could have been something special, but it was just typical of that kind of, where the dreaming of Wenger, where he thought, I've got these lads, I'll keep them together, I'll build an English spine in the team, and they're all going to be really good. And it was just just a perfect example of the way Wenger thought about football at that moment, which I thought was wonderful. And Jack Wilshere was the spearhead. Aaron Ramsey then became that spearhead actually on the pitch because just Jack didn't play as much as he could have done. But for me it was Jack Wilshere because he would have been what, 8 or 9 when Wenger was like had some of the best players in the world training around him, and then he grew up in that environment to create that midfielder. So Jack Wilshere for me, lads.
Also, I think you two are both great shouts. I think Özil in particular, supremely talented, but ultimately just a bit fragile. That probably sums up this period quite well.
Yeah,
but I can't pick
a flawed genius, no less. Yeah.
I think same with Wilshere. I think both of them at the start of this period are probably, when we started speaking, was this a turning point, or did it feel like a turning point? Both of those players were part of that hope, and and then by the end of it, they were probably the reason, big reasons why Wenger ended up going, because they couldn't cope. But I can't pick anyone but Aaron Ramsey. 2 FA Cup final winners in this time. For me, I know Nave disagrees. I think an absolutely incredible midfielder that would fit into pretty much any Arsenal team over the years.
Yeah.
When we were at our best, it was these 4 players in the picture here. When we were at our best in that period, I honestly think that might be some of the best football we played under Wenger the whole time.
Oh, it was great.
It was absolutely incredible at times.
It's glorious, yeah.
These 4 players were so fluid. They all moved around and played across the whole pitch, and it was incredible. But yeah, for me, Aaron Ramsey is just a player I miss so much. And again, probably the last player that I truly loved as a football fan, because there's some players now that I definitely love. I love Saka, I love Rice, but I don't think I'll ever love a football player like I did Aaron Ramsey again. There was plenty before it, like Bergkamp, Bright, Henry, all of these players, but Aaron Ramsey probably was the last one of those. And him and Wenger obviously went at very similar times. I think, did they even go the same year in the end? I'll lose track now. But yeah, it was.
Yeah, you might be right.
It felt like the end of an era when Ramsey went, and Aaron Ramsey.
No, it was the year after he left. He played a season under Emery.
Yeah, and no one deserves that. But that leads us into where we'll pick up next week. Arsenal like to imagine life without Wenger, a new manager, a new direction, but replacing a legend is one thing. We've seen plenty of other teams struggle with it. Living up to a legend is something very different, isn't it? Because next time we'll begin the story of life after Wenger. Well, that's it. I don't know. Quite a weird, emotional episode in a way, isn't it? Because it's tough.
A little bit, yeah.
Bit of Wenger, really. Thinking back, brings back a lot of tough memories, I'd say. Because it wasn't very, very nice as someone who absolutely loved the man. It was a tough period.
Yeah. Special shout out to Puma for completely making that time even worse by releasing some of the worst kits I've ever seen.
So glad you said that, because every picture that you put up has been fucking awful.
Yeah. So thanks, lads, for completely contributing.
This was the last good kit, wasn't it? That nice Nike one there, and then into the shit of Puma straight after that, wasn't it? It's such a shame that Alexis Sánchez' whole Arsenal career had to be in a Puma shirt, isn't it?
It summed it up, didn't it?
It really did. Well, yeah, we'll be back next time then, talking Emery and maybe the start of Arteta. But cheers, lads. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, cheers, man.
Yeah, cheers, boys.
Wherever you're listening, make sure you subscribe. We'll be back next week with more of this. We'll continue this series. On Tuesday, we'll have the next slot and hopefully a signing of Vinicius Jr. and Bruno and whoever else it might be, Mbappe and Jude Bellingham, as I mentioned at the end of the last episode. Yeah, all of them will be out doing pre-season with us. So, yeah, make sure you subscribe to hear all the latest on that. Right, well, that brings to an end, I suppose. Yeah, love you, Arsène. I'll see you later.
Messi.
Cheers, guys.
See you, boys.